Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Good Times Hour. Okay, B, take it away.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls around the world, please welcome to the T our next guest. He's the man with the plan to take the game around the span. The modern day Marco Polo who went from working the PDGA solo to taking the sport global. With Keek Mama and Earl the Girl with their paws on the helm, there wasn't no place that was safe from the growth of the game. He's the Hall of Famer with first class honors, the Frisbee freak who has made the Tour de Freak. Isle Selassie fam, this man walks the walk and rides the line from Cape Town to Cairo on the ground. He's the pinball wizard of statistics, the mystic blaster and two-time world master champ who knows what it takes to light the lamp and spread the rays of hope and growth. Ladies and gentlemen, on the tee, from lovely Algonquin Island across the bay from the center of the universe, please welcome Brian, the international sports and travel professional, Hoeniger.
Nice.
It's a pleasure there. I didn't realize, Mr. B, you're going to give me my own introduction on tee number 3 on the island, as you've been doing for many years to our collective amusement and entertainment.
This is all praise, though. No,
and I appreciate the two-time master champion, well, false though it may be.
Well, we will get into that.
One-time Masters doubles world champion with Uncle Bob.
It's not twice?
Oh, it wasn't twice?
Oh, we finished second twice and first, second both years at the Port Arthur Worlds and first in Huntsville when the Swedes came over. Thomas and Frederick smoked all the big USA dogs in the Open division.
Yeah. Okay, because
1993.
You go on to the PDGA Worlds or PDGA database, 1994 World Championships. They show you as winning. Looks like a tie with Doug Correa and Red Whittington.
Oh, well, I'll go look at that since I would probably be responsible for that data, and I don't remember trying to do something untoward in my favor.
All right, Mace. Well, let's for those unfortunate enough to have never come out of the shadow of their rock and know who this illustrious personage with us today is, put the framework on it, Mace.
Well, I'm actually waiting on the printer, so if you give me just a moment.
Okay.
I'm somewhat behind on everything that's not Christmas lights right now.
That's true. We are catching him at a very strained part of his life. You're going to get a little smoother and better after this, right, Brian?
Yeah, it's coming. I mean, we just finished our last big install / special project yesterday, and this actually kind of caught me off guard. But all right, so framework, and as you can see, you can't see me because I'm having some technical difficulty with the camera, and I left the wired version at the house, so I'm just dealing with this, and we're gonna go with my voice and not my face, which is probably the best way anyways. So since 2007, you were the accountant / tour support for TDA, Tour de Afrique Global Cycling, the world's leading distance cycling tour organization. And I really honestly don't know anything about that. So why don't you enlighten me just a little bit, Brian, because that sounds really interesting.
Sure. Well, before I worked for the PDGA, I got a degree in international development. My wife got her nursing degree, and we went to Africa to work the famine in Ethiopia and then a 4-year health care development project in Lesotho. The gentleman who started that Canadian humanitarian NGO, Henry Gold, fellow Torontonian, years later came up with the idea of riding bicycles from Cairo to Cape Town, which a few individuals had did, but there had never been an organized expedition. And so he began the company that used to be called Tour d'Afrique, is now called TDA Global Cycling. I worked for them from 2007. I had 2 jobs at the time. I was also the PDGA International Director, but I could balance the 2 jobs at that time. I worked for them from 2007 when I came back from 2.5 years living in the USA, helping to build the International Disc Golf Center. So when I handed over the then PDGA executive directorship to Brian Graham, and my wife ceased working as memberships manager, and we returned to Toronto, I went to work for the bicycle tour company. And I was primarily their accountant. I also did a lot of tour support work. So over the next 11 years until COVID, every year I would get, you know, the perk of that job was you got to ride your bike in far-flung locales. You had to pay your airfare, you had to, you know, buy your tent, pay your food on the rest days, but I didn't have to pay an entry fee because I worked for them. So that's why I could afford to do those things. And I cycled Cairo to Cape Town, Iran and Turkey, Patagonia, Central America, and Hanoi to Singapore were the main rides. And I can tell you that some of the best days of my life being halfway around the world in the middle of nowhere with not even knowing what day of the week it was. And all I've got to do is I've got to ride my bike from, you know, from Bangkok to Hua Hin, Thailand on this or that day, or cross the Sudan border into Ethiopia. Those were some very, very good days, many of the best days of my life, and some of the hardest days of my life, as you can imagine.
There's a photo. This is from the most recent one, isn't it?
That is, well, we'd have to look at what the sign says in the back there. That looks like it's somewhere in Southeast Asia. Yeah, that's
That was,
that's in Thailand. Yeah.
that's a great photo. And so how do you even know, or you even ever thought about how many miles you've cycled in your
I've
time with
done
TDA?
about 60,000 kilometers over the last 14, 15 years.
Nice.
Yeah.
How long is that Cape Town to Cairo ride? How many days? How many weeks or whatever?
12,000 kilometers, so 7,500 miles, 4 months. Every fifth day or so is a rest day. So you're on your bike for 4 days, then you come into a capital city or a touristic highlight and you have a rest day there. So on those days, on the dinners coming in, we didn't cook those for you and we didn't feed you on the rest days. So you were on your own, and then you would explore the sites, whatever they were. And then the next morning you would get out of your tent and have your big bowl of porridge with peanut butter and banana, have you, and get on your bike and do whatever that day demanded. 125K with 1,500 meters and up and down, or whatever they said it was. Yep.
That's incredible.
That sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah, on that company, it survived COVID. When 2 years ago now, I resigned that job because I could not balance the two anymore. The growth of disc golf during the post-COVID boom meant that my plate was so full that I could not do both jobs anymore. And so I negotiated with now Executive Director Joe Shargolef to work as International Director and Canada Manager on a full-time basis.
And that
There
I
you
still
go.
help the bicycle tour company with their accounting because it's very complex. They have they transact in more than 60 currencies, and they have bank accounts in 8 currencies, and it all has to be valued in the end in Canadian dollars because they're a Canadian company for income tax and Revenue Canada purposes. So
well, you're not only a pinball wizard when it comes to stats, but just with numbers in general. I take pride in my ability to count scorecards, but I defer to you as the greater master when it comes to putting the sums together.
yeah, those skills are becoming obsolete with
Right.
with IT, but yeah,
It's nice though. I love not having to check scorecards. And it's like, what? Oh yeah, that's over. Okay, let's go on to this. How
Yeah.
about lunch?
So you were also well, you mentioned it, you are currently the International Director, Canada Manager with the PDGA.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk to you about this later in more expansive detail, but you've been the PDGA Administrator from 97 to 2000, and then the PDGA Executive Director until 2007, all of which was on the island. And again, this is a huge topic for later, but there's only 2 things that have occurred within the PDGA history that have not been in the United States. That's the Worlds and the location of the home office, and both of those have been on the Toronto Island. So
yeah, I mean, we've had a major in Europe for a number of years, and hopefully we'll soon know when the first MPO FPO Pro Worlds will be in Europe, something that a lot of us have desired for a long time. But yeah, until the international program was started in 2007, the PDJ was predominantly a USA plus Canada institution, and we would see our friends from Japan, from around the world every year at the World Championships. And we mustn't forget the Japan Open major as well, which, you know,
Oh, yeah.
was one that was before it was a major. It was one of the best events in the world in the mid to late 1980s. And when it came back in the late 1990s through the early 2000s, then it became one of the sport's four majors at the time. So,
Well,
Well,
it
and anybody
routinely,
that's been there won't forget it. I
yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
that's definitely one of the more epic events that anybody could go to, I believe.
Yeah, no, it was unbelievable. I was fortunate enough to be there twice, and it was unbelievable experience. Hospitality, unbelievable.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree with that 100%. So, and then in 2003, you were inducted into the Hall of Fame with Dr. Stancil Johnson and Mark Horn and Flagstaff. It says here,
no, you don't have to
some,
read it all.
huh?
Just go to the last phrase.
Just go to the last phrase. Okay. Disc golfers everywhere. Oh, Brian, a world of thanks.
Yes. I mean,
There you go.
Well, you want to hear the tale about induction?
yeah.
yes.
So Speedy, the then Hall of Fame administrator, would phone up the office here hoping to get my wife because they were in on my induction and I had no clue. I thought he would phone and I would be the one here instead of my wife, and he would start asking me questions about Mark Horn or Stancil, if I remember right, the two gentlemen who were inducted into me. And they managed, between my wife and Speedy, they managed to keep it a secret right up to the ceremony
Really?
in Flagstaff. And I'm sitting there at the table. We're going through the award ceremony for the Flagstaff Pro Worlds. And now it's the Hall of Fame induction. And Speedy's about, 8 feet to one side of me. And he's got the Hall of Fame disc there. And I reach for the disc to have a look at it to see what's the cool logo that they've got Mark and Stancil going into there. And lo and behold, there was a third name. And I was inducted about 90 seconds later, shaking my head in disbelief and trying to run off the top of the head everybody I should thank who'd helped me along the way. Yeah.
Well,
That was pretty cool.
It's a beautiful moment. It's a wonderful institution. I mean, you're recognized by your peers, and in this case, it's 150% merited. Your work as an ambassador, as a founder, as a tournament director, as a promoter. That's I mean, disc golf. It's true. Disc golfers everywhere owe you a world of thanks, because around the world has been your global vision all along. But let's take it back. Let's take it back to the origin. You were born in the same year as the Pluto platter is first launched, 1957. So
Where do you get all
of
these stats?
Oh,
I do the research.
dude, you have no idea how deep he
Probably
digs on
talked
this
to my
stuff.
wife as well.
No, I haven't talked to Laura yet, actually, but
It's true. I was born in 56. I am approaching my 67th birthday. 27 years at the PDGA. Hard to believe. I still remember going to see Becky Powell in a little cow town in Texas and
Weatherford, yeah.
loading the then very humble PDJ office onto a semi with Ontario plates and flying then back from Dallas to Toronto and renting a van a few days later, driving out to some warehouse in Mississauga and picking up the pallet worth of stuff and driving it on the island and setting up the office in this very room I'm talking to you from.
right there, that's the whole, for years and years, that was the whole nerve center of an international operation. But before we get to that, I want to ask you, I know you're a sporty guy. When you were growing up, did you play other sports? Were you, like, when you were going through school, did you play? What did you play?
Soccer was my game. My father was a Second World War refugee from Germany, and soccer was his game. So he taught me soccer, and
Not just
I was
refugee, he
pretty
was
good
a
at that. Yeah.
university lecturer, honored emeritus at University of Toronto. That's important.
Where do you get this stuff?
He was the chair of the English department. Come on, this is
That's
important.
true. This is all true. This
is all
true.
B type information too.
Well,
I mean,
Mister,
come on.
this is how B comes up with his poetry when everybody is on the tee pad. He must have spent like a week before every edition of the Timmel just researching all these characters.
Oh, it's a little more than a week.
the whole summer for the 10-hour research. Okay, so I mean, back in the day, frisbees were everywhere. They were in the zeitgeist, and
Yeah.
and growing up, you grew up in Toronto, is that right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so, I mean, thanks to Ken Westerfield, Jim Kenner, Gail McCall, frisbee was the kind of active counterculture sport, and you had to be really deep under a rock to not know what a frisbee was. Do you remember your first introduction to a frisbee?
To a frisbee, the first introduction, no, but what I can tell you is in the mid 70s, my friends and I used to play catch everywhere we could, and we would play annoying catch across major streets and things like that. I remember we were once threatened with citizen's arrest in Edmonton and so on. But no, we would through the 141 molds, the world's master frisbees, I think 165s. We had tons of those 119 molds. And we weren't freestylers. We were freestyling when it came to throwing. We could all throw it 6 or 7 different ways, but our catches were basically between the legs and behind the backs, and no fancy toothbrushes or arm rolls and things like that. Never quite did that. But
No nail delays.
yeah, nail delays. I'm a very poor nail delayer. So we played frisbee ad nauseum through those years, and I think it was in 1982. The course on the island, I think, went in 79, and a couple of my friends heard about it first, and I think it was in 82 that they took me down and I played the island course with old lids for the first time. And I may not have played it more than a couple more times before 1984 tree planting summer in BC, when one of my old frisbee friends who now lived in Vancouver, I was tree planting in the interior. I came down to see him on a break between contracts, and he said, "Hey, there's the opening of the Vancouver disc golf course on CBC radio, and it's happening this weekend. Let's go." And so we did, and that's where I bought my first ever golf disc, an old 86 mold.
Okay.
And it was not long thereafter that I became a fanatic for disc golf. I remember when I heard, what do you mean? There's a professional association of players? How cool is that? There's a world championships? Oh man, that's the coolest thing I've ever heard. I am so in. And I think the thing was, and no, that was also the time when we were living in Africa. So we would only be home for like 5 weeks a year in May and June. And I would just go absolutely nuts and playing the game. I remember once I didn't know there was a tournament, but I had come down to the island course, the old original layout, which Mr. B may remember.
Yeah.
It was just under 4,000 feet long. I once blew through a tournament in 19 minutes shooting 8 under. Yeah. So,
Wow.
Playing speed golf and just savaging the field at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. I came in and I asked Westerfield, I shot 46. Is that any good? And he said, well, you'd be in second place. And I think probably the next year was when I joined the PDGA and played tournaments on my home leave. Yeah.
That's amazing. That's a great story. So 86 mold, that answers the first disc question, but Mace, how about the other part of that question?
Well, so what was I'm sorry, you caught me off guard here. First time playing disc golf, when was that? When did you first get introduced?
That was on the island, probably the nicer weather months of 1982.
And do you remember any of the early disc heroes or the early disc top players back then? I mean, Sully, we all know.
Everybody, the Toronto crowd, it was Michael Sullivan amongst the Toronto crowd. He was a world's top 10 player at the time. Lost the 1987 Worlds on Toronto Island in extra time to Greg Hosfeld. I was overseas at the time, so I didn't get to witness it. I mean, it was Michael Sullivan, and of course, as soon as you joined the PDJ, you started getting the newsletters, and so we knew that people like Steve Wisecup and Dave Greenwell and John Ahart Melissamans were among the world's best players, mid to late 80s, and then Climo arrived on the scene, and the world changed.
But when you
Yeah.
first started getting like really bit by the bug, and back then there was only pro divisions, there were no AM divisions.
Yeah.
So, you're a sporty, competitive guy. Are there any players who are in the field, the local players, the local tournaments, or the local scene that you were like, that guy's number one clearly, and I want to beat him one day, other than Sully?
Well, Sully, I mean, the big three or four in Southern Ontario, Sully was the first number one. It could be argued that Malton and him switched back being number one through the very late 80s and early 90s. Greg Pinniger, also from St. Thomas, like Maltbag, was the rookie of the year in, I think, 1990.
89.
No, he was the amateur world champion at the first amateur nationals.
That's right.
At Boylan Farms, I think in 89 or 90. And then in 91, he lost the rookie of the year narrowly to Brad Hammock.
Right.
So those were the big boys. Bob Harris, who became my doubles partner, was also one of the top shooters. And of course, Elaine and Joanne Gallagher were basically two ladies in the world's top 5 who were also both from Toronto.
Yeah.
So that's in terms of, and of course from the West Coast, because in Canada disc golf was really Southern Ontario, Vancouver, and the BC Islands. Glenn Whitlock was is known as one of the original disc golf tourists.
Yeah.
Still pulling it off today.
And never owned a car. I love that. How do you put on that many miles without ever owning a car? That's some perseverance.
Yeah.
And especially in a time where everybody had a car, and now it's a completely different thing. Like out of anywhere from 12 to 15 guys that I had on my crew this year, as many as 5 of them relied on Uber and Lyft to get to and from work every day.
Wow.
And it's like, that's a completely different perspective. Like they're like, oh, I can't even afford it. It's way cheaper for me to just Lyft and Uber. And I was just like, okay. Like in my day, I was like, I don't care. Let's get a car. To hell with 2 wheels. I want 4, So your PDGA number is 4022.
Yep.
And we've heard from approximately 97% of our guests about how they could have had a lower number if they had done this. Do you fall into that category, or did you just get a number because you happened to be in an event, or what were the circumstances that led to you?
I can tell you the circumstances. I mean, the answer is, I mean, I talked to all these people. Well, my number is 12,000, but it could have been 1,200. Well, we can all play coulda, shoulda, woulda all day long, but you didn't. Quite frankly, I joined at one of the first opportunities I could. It was the warm up to the Worlds in '87 when I was home in May and June. There was a fairly big warm up tournament for the Worlds to follow in a few months on Toronto Island, and there was a car of 3 leading American tourists who came: Wisecup, Harvey Brandt, and Slate Paul, I think, if I remember right.
Brent
All right.
And I talked to Westerfield and maybe Blakely. Bob Blakely was also a big time organizer in early Toronto. And they told me, they called over Wisecup and said, give Wisecup your membership and he'll make sure it reaches the PDJ office, which I think was in Tennessee at the time. And Wisecup was from Dayton, Ohio. Anyways, I mean, I think it took him a couple of months to actually get it there. So maybe I could have been 3,900 and change. But it is what it is. And sometime, I think I gave him the money in early June, and sometime in late July or something, my first envelope from PDJ HQ arrived in the mailbox, and the rest is history.
So let's talk a little bit about that history. According to the PDGA database, your first ever PDGA event is the 1986 PDGA Championships. I assume that was at Centennial Park because the TD is Phil Palumbo. Recall that one?
1986 in Centennial. Well, by then I certainly was playing doubles on Centennial every Monday night. That's my first listed event in the D base.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just find it interesting
Okay.
that the TD was Phil Palumbo and you tied for 21st with Phil Palumbo, which gives us a great conversation opener for talk to us about Phil Palumbo. Now, it's my understanding that he was one of the guys instrumental in starting the Can-Am Tour, and I think didn't he generate the idea for the Super Tour? Is that correct?
He may have generated, I mean, some of what you're saying there, B, is before my time as a real insider. So,
Right.
what was going on at decision makings and PDJ board meetings in their infancy is, all I know is what's in the then disc golfer newsletter. But Palumbo, I think he became the Island TD as well for a spell, but then he had I think he had a scrap with one of the big Toronto players, and he then moved to Windsor, and I think he got some good paying job. Don Cherry was a close friend of his, if I remember right, and he sort of disappeared off the scene by 1990 or so. So, I mean, I have some recollections of him being the TD and playing, either doubles or casual island or island tournament golf with him, but that's a long time ago. Those memories are pretty vague, but I mean, I
Okay.
can see the guy in my head, you know? Yeah.
Okay, well, let's move on to 1987.
Well, that'll be easier to remember.
Well, 87 was, came home from Lesotho in probably the beginning of May and was home until June and probably played, well, I know the island tournament was the first one. You'd have to
The
tell
disc golf
me.
challenge?
Yeah, I think, yeah, that's what it was called. That's the one, I think Wise Cup won it. If you're looking at the
Yeah.
stats, it should be the one that Wise Cup won.
And it wasn't Slate Paul, it was Brian Hambrick.
Okay, there you go. There you go.
But
Yes,
good
I
memory,
remember. I
though.
remember.
Oh, there you
I
go.
remember
Yeah, Wise
Brett.
Cup, Harvey Brandt, then Brent Hambrick.
Yeah, I remember Hamburg very well. And there's another guy who did an awful lot for the game in his hometown of Columbus.
Yeah,
Yeah,
without a doubt.
yeah. But I mean, what I would have done in 87 coming home, once I think I would get off the plane one evening and then I would be on the boat to the island by 9 o'clock the next morning, not feeling any jet lag because I just had adrenaline going. You're about to play the island again for the first time in 11 months. And
Were you
yeah,
living on the island back then?
no. We got when we came back from Africa in 1990. A friend of ours managed to get us a rental in a dilapidated house about a block from where we live, and we lived there for 2 years. And then the legislation governing the future of the island community was coming down the track under the then left of center provincial NDP government. And my wife literally went door to door, sell us your house. And an old lady who had fallen on her bike on the bridge and bust her hip the winter before said, I will sell you my house because I want to move back to Victoria, BC, where I came from for my last years.
Wow.
And we got this house on September the 1st, 1992.
Nice.
Awesome. So you've been there 31 years, huh?
31 years, except when I'm riding my bike overseas or living in Georgia for the 2.5 years that we were there. Yeah. When the guy who started the bicycle tour company and sent us to Africa, he got to rent the house. Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
I have to scratch his back because he scratched mine pretty good.
All right. So why don't you tell us a little bit about Ken Westerfield and his influence on Toronto and also the island and disc golf, generally speaking, in Ontario?
Well, I mean, I personally, Westerfield dates from the 70s and the formation of disc golf. I think the earliest world championships, the WAMO World Championships, I believe, in Irvine, California. I think the two of you have probably seen that video clip, Snapper
Yeah.
Pearson is in it, and you can see Westerfield
Yeah.
throwing a forehand that nobody else could come close to replicating at the time. He had some fancy wind up like that. I mean, I only met with Westerfield a few times, and one of them was, as I said, was blowing through one of his tournaments, and saying, how's my
Right.
score look at the end of it? The guy I knew a little better was Bob Blakely. Now, both of them were heavily involved, as was another guy called Warren Young in Irwin Toy Canada, which was the Canadian chapter, I believe, of Mattel, or the Canadian chapter of Whammo, if I've got it correct. And so it was Irwin Toy with sponsorship from Orange Crush, the soft drink that, and the aforementioned three gentlemen who were instrumental in getting the two courses into Toronto circa 1979, the Island and then Centennial Park on the west side of the city. And both those courses are still there, having gone through several different
Wait a minute.
configurations each.
She can't just walk through the room without saying hi.
Hi, Lori.
Hi, Lori.
Was she here?
Yeah.
She snuck right in and split immediately.
She can't hear because
He's retired from disc golf. Trivia question. What long-time PDJ employee has never played disc golf?
Wait a minute. Let me guess. Laurie.
Laurie Gibson, yes. Yeah. Because
okay,
horse
so-
riding was her sport, which was an uphill battle,
riding.
given she came from a blue-collar worker, and equestrian is a sport for the filthy rich.
Is she
Yeah.
still?
So she would be going, she and her $5,000 horse would be going up against Cindy Firestone and her $50,000 horse. And you could imagine who generally won the ribbon. Yeah.
Well, she's got a great smile, so she always wins the gold ribbon. For the
She was a
smile
great
category.
PDJ memberships manager. That's for sure.
Yeah, without a doubt. Definitely miss talking to her from time to time.
Yep.
Okay, so
Onwards.
your first Worlds were 1990 Scottsdale, the 1990 year of 1990. You know, for those of us who live up here, especially back then, winters were longer and stronger, and we would just rely on back issues of World News or Disc Golfer, and just consume. That's how, before social media, before the internet, that's how we consumed our disc golf information. As I was researching our next guest, Steve Valencia, he's a very elusive figure, and so I had to go back to as many of the old print publications as I could, and I just went through each and every one of them. And in the spring, and then the summer editions of Disc Golf World News, there were odds of who's going to win Scottsdale, Arizona Worlds. I don't know if you recall those, but it was like a list of 20 players or whatever with odds, and I believe A. Hart was originally given the best odds. A. Hart and Wisecup had the best odds because Wisecup won 89, A. Hart won 88. And then
Kenny had just arrived on the scene, but he had
just arrived
in the Worlds the year before.
And I think he was like the third or the fourth highest rated odd on for winning the Worlds. Steve Valencia was a couple of places down below, and he
was just arriving on the scene as well too.
Were you aware were you aware of a rivalry at that time, and how big of an impact do you think, like how large a shadow did they loom, the Climo's name in 1990 and Valencia's name? Can you remember back that far? Can you remember that hype?
I remember that tournament very, very well, because it was my Worlds, and as you were saying, one of the super cool things about that Worlds, which was with all the people who came before, said this was without question the best World so far by quite a bit. But if you can imagine, I mean, I was warming up on the island in late October, and it was about 50 Fahrenheit or 10 Celsius outside, and the wind was blowing, and you get off the plane in Phoenix, and all of a sudden it's it's October the 8th. It's 92 degrees Fahrenheit outside. There isn't a cloud to be seen, and you're about to play in the World Championships. And it was just, went to the Grand Canyon after practicing for a few days before we teed off, and it was phenomenal. I mean, there's a lot of things about that tournament I remember. I mean, if you've listened to the Climo interview with Brian Hoeniger, he talks about hole 17 in the finals, or the hole 8, it may have been in the finals, but it was hole 17 on Shelley Sharp, 450 feet straight ahead, and he put it like 8 feet from the basket to go up by 2 with 1 to play. I mean, I remember watching that. In fact, you know, it might surprise Kenny, and it's, you know, it's inconsequential next to his birdie, but I birdied that hole with a scorpion the last time I played it, about 28 feet from the basket.
Nice. With the scorpion.
Yeah.
Sweet. I like that sting right there.
But wasn't there some controversy there too? Like, didn't Sammy have a putt that fell through the bottom of a basket?
The
And then-
controversy, the controversy that I remember in the final round, Sammy Grisafi, God, that guy was hitting bombs,
Oh,
just
he can go
bombs. I
far.
mean, and people didn't know who he was because it wasn't Ahart. Ahart and the local player, I think Terry Teal, the local player, he was rounding out the lead foursome in the final. There was a second foursome in the final, and Valencia was in it, but they were off the pace not to be a factor. The fourth person in the lead group was Ahart, and at one point there was a tiny little downhill hole, basically from the fence overlooking what's the name of the bar there that everybody goes to? That's Dudes. Yeah. And this was like 150 downhill shot to a tiny island in this piece of water in that corner of the property.
Right.
And the question, Ahart came up short, and he swore that he touched in bounds, and it really didn't look like he did, but he fought so hard for it that eventually the rest of the group said, okay, we'll give it to you. So instead of having a 70-footer for par, he had a 20-footer for birdie. And that was a little controversial because I think in the end, if Grisafi was one back, I think Ahart was only two back or so, maybe three at the finish line. So that was the little bit of interesting moment during the round. But I mean, we're talking
Ahart
the
was two
World
behind.
Championship finals. So I mean, once that hole was over, we moved on because the battle was still rolling.
Right.
Yeah.
That was not bad. 180 MPO. You became 53rd in your first Worlds. Totally gaga getting to see, I mean, your first Worlds experience. Did you soak it all in? Did you do the fly mark? Did you do all the doubles?
Oh, absolutely. I did it all. But there is a tragedy in that 53rd place. If you look, I'm the first name who didn't play the semifinal.
Yeah.
After 3 days, so after 6 rounds, I was in 6th place in my pool and 28th in the tournament. And everybody was going, well, who's this guy? I've never heard of him. And I was in Africa for 4 years. Sorry. And Rothstein, I'd already been writing to the magazine, and Rothstein said, well, I knew you were a good writer, but I didn't know you could play good too. But unfortunately, I got nervous on the last day from all the excitement, and I shot 9 under total for the 2 rounds, and they weren't that difficult courses. And a bunch of people who hadn't played up to scratch yet, all of a sudden shot 16 or 18 for the day, and enough of them blew past me I remember I was at 45 under after 8 rounds, 45 under, and you missed the cut.
Wow.
Yeah. I remember I was ahead of Sullivan after 3 days, and he came in and he said, today the fountain went down, and he shot like 10 down on the fountain. And I said, what's your total? And he said, 48. And I said, well, I'm at 45. And he said, oh, you're in for sure. And then we literally watched them put the page up on the window of the office, the hotel room that was the office of the tournament, and they had drawn a line in the sand in pen, and my name was the first one on the wrong side of it, and I was pretty devastated. Yeah, but that's the way it goes. Yeah.
Just to let the history show that you were 2 strokes ahead of Mitch Mack. So
yeah, it wasn't
good company.
I played pretty good. I shot a 9 under on Shelley Sharp, where the best score by anyone was 11, I think. So
yeah, that's respectable.
Yeah,
definitely. I mean, with all the water in the OB around there too, 9's pretty solid.
Yeah. So as you can see, I remember that one pretty darn well.
Yeah. Nice.
Well, and I think the climate alone probably enhanced those memories. You go from shivering and knock-knee, and then get out and you're just wearing shorts and a t-shirt or shorts and a golf shirt and enjoying that I
Oh, it
mean,
was
I remember the
paradise,
first time I
and
played.
everybody, everybody was loving it. It was the biggest Worlds in terms of players, and from what I'm told, I mean, some of the previous ones obviously were great, and some of the previous ones probably had their challenges, but this was without a question the best Worlds that had ever happened at that time. And I think it took them quite a few years before another Worlds, was of that level. But part of it had to do with the fact that it was October. All of a sudden, we were in Arizona.
Yeah,
Like
without a
we had an
doubt.
extended season. It was 92 and dry humidity, not a cloud in the sky all week long. I mean, it was paradise.
Nice.
I remember the first time I ever played Shelly Sharp, I was there doing a gig and I just had gone on my own. I played by myself. I didn't know anybody. I looked it up in the directory and this was when I still had two of my first discs in my bag, whatnot, and I threw like my rock in the creek there. And so I was like, nah, I'll check my shoes and my socks off. And I just played the rest of the round carrying my shoes and socks because it was not summertime. It was so beautiful. The grass was lush. And I was just like, man, this place is awesome. I'm never going to forget this, and sure enough. So moving forward as a player, you had 17 Masters wins and one Grandmaster win, but your first win was in 92 on the island. And
Yep.
Bob Blakely was the first, was a TD, and there was
Yep.
11 Masters. You beat Red and
I beat Red
Stocky.
in overtime.
Oh,
Oh,
Yeah,
nice.
yeah. Yeah, and on the previous, took 2 or 3 holes in the previous hole, which Mr. B may remember, it was old original hole 5. It was the one where we had Jerry Gallant, the aggressive Red Wing.
right.
Red hit the basket with his drive. So I survived that. And then we stepped up to hole 6 and I threw my AVR 290 on turnover, and it was like 3 feet from the basket. And that's all she wrote.
Nice.
Nice.
You also beat Whitlock and Royce Razzle Dazzle Razanowski, who was playing. I mean, he's always got game himself too. So
Yeah, he was
For-
an older master.
and that's
He would've been-
back in the day when Masters was 35.
Yep, that's true. Yep.
Nice.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about Bob Blakely and his role in the Toronto disc golf.
Well, we kind of covered a little bit about that.
Oh, it was such a great, one of the things that people, Mr. B may not know this, but there was a little promo for the 87 Worlds, which Bob was the co-TD of. And one day leading up to the Worlds, the Toronto Sun, which is our rag newspaper, had a sunshine boy and a sunshine girl of the day. Typically the girl would be in a bikini and the boy would be flexing his muscles. And one day Bob Blakely was the sunshine boy because he was about to TD 87 World Championships.
Nice.
That's hilarious.
Well,
Bob
you
was
really
he was a
diminished
he was a
my
wonderful
feeling.
character. He was a really happy-go-lucky, always in a good mood type of guy. And he ran the tournaments from, I guess, probably Westerfield stopped after the 87 Worlds. So for the next few years, Blakely and Palumbo, who we mentioned, would have been the TDs in the Toronto area. And I think Blakely probably ran them until about 92, and then I ran them for 3 or 4 years, and then I handed over to a gentleman whose face I am looking at right now.
Yeah.
Who took the Toronto Island Open and came up with the best name for an amateur tournament I think that there has ever been.
Right on.
Affectionately known as Tide, full name Toronto Island Driver Education. What an outstanding name for an amateur tournament.
Well, Brian, you just shot a flaming cannonball through the sail of one of my great disc golf memories of making the cover of the Toronto Sun. Now that I know it's a rag, it's really.
You were on the Star.
Oh, never mind. Never mind.
There's an interesting symmetry with your time, with you on the island, me on the island, with all these names. Your first tournament is the TD is Phil Palumbo, and you tie Phil Palumbo. Yep. Your first time running a tournament on the island was my first time playing a tournament on the island. Mm-hmm. And as part of my winnings, the PDGA membership was part of that package.
Nice.
my first tournament that I directed was 1998, and that was your biggest payout win so far, largely thanks to the skins, but which we should probably get into at some point.
Oh, I played good that tournament. I could have, should have won that tournament as a master playing open.
Right.
I had, you can look at the names behind me. In the end, I think I lost a branch by one, and Scott Martin came from the second group and shot by far the best round of anybody in the tournament in the last round to win. And as good as a player was, I was surprised to hear him say, I finally got the monkey off my back. That's my first A-tier win. And this guy was a top 20 player.
Oh yeah.
With multiple top 10s at the World Championships and so on.
And maybe one of the best lefties of all time too. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen anybody throw a rock on a turnover, regardless of what hand, more pure than Scott Martin. I mean,
yeah,
I saw him do it a bunch at Northwoods, and I pushed him on that match. So, that was one of my few glory stories. But just to watch him, the way that he played all those turnover shots with that rock, and it was just like, it looked like a righty, backhand shot a lot of the times, and that except for the reverse action and everything. But man, that's pretty amazing.
Now, I don't want to contradict you, Brian, because I know Scott Martin did get his first win, but that wasn't 98. That was the year Brad Schick won. Brad Schick and Jeff Moulton, first and second.
Oh, that's different. Yeah. No, that was
you won Masters. Chappie was right behind you.
Yeah, and it was first Masters plus second Open. There's a story about that little skins as well.
Yeah.
First Masters and second Open, who was Moulton. So me and Moulton versus Schick and Chapman for all the skins.
So I'm back at Tournament Central crunching the numbers to get everything ready. That's going on. I got Johnny Rockets to go out and take pictures of it. But please fill us in with your verbal descriptions.
Well, what happened was we were playing one of the easier holes in what was then the second layout, the layout I think that came in the early to mid 90s or so.
Right.
So all of a sudden we had, the standard 18 holes were like 6,000 feet, maybe 7,000 feet. But there was one hole coming home. It was the hole after the washrooms and before Freddie Laker. So this is basically a 260 turnover with the basket protected by a pine tree. There was that hole. And somehow Maltbag and I managed to leave our drives about 90 short. And Schick and Chapman were parked. And I step up first and I hit the pole with my 86 from 90 feet going for it. Moulton throws, believe it or not, he throws a stingray putt. And he put it right in the middle. And to deny them, I think 3 or 4 skins at the time, and which we took 1 or 2 holes later. That's the story about why we won a bunch of money that day.
Yeah. I remember actually Rockets took a photo of, it was a little bit of a photo montage where you see, and back then we were playing on the Mach 1s where it had just like the 12 chains with the S hooks instead of the S hooks this way. They were like this. So it was like a curtain that you had to close or part, and Moulton would get up there and do his little artistic finessing of the chains, move this one here and move that one there.
Oh,
take
yeah,
his full time, go back 90 feet back to his line. People who are like, you're adjusting the chains at 90 feet? Look at this guy. I can imagine the gallery must have been like, what's up with this guy? But I saw him like with the disc up here, and then the disc there, and then in, and you're just like, yo!
Ridiculous. No business pushing that hole.
It was, I don't know, it was like 75 US on the line per hole, or maybe 100. Maybe $50 per hole. I can't remember what the total was, but it was some good money on there, obviously.
No, the event I was talking about a minute ago where I had the lead going into Sunday, that was the 2001 event.
Okay.
Because I've still got your Ma's trophy up here.
All right.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Let's bring that out just so
you should absolutely
rub Mr. B.
That's right. Here we go.
Those are still you're not the first person actually
look at that
to show that off.
Glass work by Mrs. Bellier Sr.
Yeah, you're definitely awesome. Well, wait till he gets back on headset. But yeah, those are coveted.
That's one of actually 2 or 3 trophies I've kept all the years.
The
So I've got-
Brinsters really were coveting those earlier too. Like you were definitely in elite company with those trophies there for sure.
So speaking of elite company, that 2001, I got the results here. Open, Scott Martin wins by a stroke over Todd Branch. Todd Branch is 2 strokes ahead of you and Sully. Do you remember tying with Sully on that?
Sully must have got us 1 or 2 shots on me the last round.
Yeah, he got 3 strokes on you.
There you go. Yeah.
And that was a big field, 35 players. We got Mike Young was there, Avery Jenkins, Brinster, Sean Sinclair, Bobby Dodge, Feldberg, Kansler. We had, John Mairo was there too. I forgot he was here.
Yeah, right. The thing that was the same year Jerry and Marie went up there too, probably.
Probably, yeah. The island has seen a lot of huge names over the years. And, one of the things I'm interested in, and you lit this fire of interest in me, Brian, was the big Can-Am years. I remember you would speak with almost this reverential tone. I could hear the capitalized, the B, the C, the A, and the Y, the big Can-Am years. Dwayne Utek in 1991 in promotional material in the Disc Golf World News leading up to the Can-Am series, or actually this was after wrapping it up. It's a great phrase here, and this is kind of typical. We want to ask you a bit more about Utek, but he said, what can you say about a series that's helped move our sport from 20 miles per hour to light speed in a 1979 Chevrolet that can only go 35? Is that typical of Utek?
Well, Utek was an advertising exec in the greater Detroit automotive industry. So you can see why he would use a 79 Chevy analogy based on where he came from. But he did try to kickstart the disc golf about, move it forward about 20 years in 2 years. And certainly for those of us who had the good fortune to be based in the Can-Am area, which at the time was Michigan, Southern Ontario, Western New York, and Northern Pennsylvania and Ohio down to Columbus. And this was typically, just like any series at the time in a normal year, there'd be 10 events that all of us who were fanatics would drive to regionally, because those were the only tournaments that were PDGA at the time within 400 or 500 miles of us. And because the sport was a lot smaller, when you went to the bigger tournaments, when you traveled to them, you would, a large number of the eastern half of the continent's best players would be there. People would come from Maryland and Illinois and so on. And they, so we'd be covering, the fields would be pretty darn good as well. But Utek, and he had an interesting rivalry, a very friendly, mutually respectful rivalry with John Houck, who was doing the big national doubles at the time and would soon thereafter run back-to-back worlds in Port Arthur. Utek threw more money at us in 1991 than we had ever seen. The Can-Am finals, if you won the Can-Am series for the year as a whole, it was $2,000 bonus money. And I think Valencia won that, and Maltbag may have been second, and Sully third, and one of the Lissamans fourth, something like that, because the Lissamans were both there. Sammy Ferens was there, Mike Williams was there, Valencia was there, as I mentioned. So these guys are playing all the events through us. We also had a team dimension to the Can-Am series, where it was your top 2 open people, your masters or your women's player, and 1 amateur, and how they fared. There was some point system that you got based on your place of finish or how many throws you took, get you points. And I remember our team finished second, and that was just a quick 400 US each more per player.
Wow.
And this was in the day when there were probably only 30 or 40 tournaments in the USA that awarded $400 for first place. And this
Well,
guy is, giving us $2,000 for winning the series and 1,500 for second and 1,000 for third. I think I came in eighth in the series and won 450 for coming in eighth.
look at you. Your
And then the
memory is
next
tight.
year he ran the world championships in Michigan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there were a couple of incidents at that event which pissed him off. It was the freedom loving disc golfers. He had hired one of his friends who had a really good band, and they were, we were all supposed to go watch them play and socialize and drink our evening beers in this one room at this fancy Hilton hotel, which was the event hotel somewhere in Greater Rochester, Michigan. And he walked in there about half an hour after the band started, and it was the band and like two disc golfers. And he went to this other room. I think it may have even been his suite, his personal suite. And he opened the door, and there were like 150 players inside. And this is one of the things that pissed Mr. Utek off. And at the end of that year, he bid adieu. And we said, thank you very much. And the sport continued and went back to normal for a few years and continued its, steady but unspectacular growth of 8 to 10% every year until about the year 2000, when the year we said, okay, you want to play in an A tier, you have to be a current member. That year, instead of being 7% growth, it was 18% growth. And
Wow.
after that,
Really?
every year we were between 10 and 12, and it kept, some years it was 15, and that kept on going all the way until COVID. Yeah. So
I've got UTech in here, and this is going to lead us into the next guy too. But we're trying to come up with a phrase, and this is just a working phrase, so please feel free to criticize. But I call them the vanishing vanquishers. People who kind of have a meteoric impact. They come into the game.
Yep.
They bring a lot of money. They bring a lot of attention and a lot of, even more important, a lot of energy, a lot of time. They want to explode the sport in a certain way that they want it exploded. And for whatever reason, they get frustrated and they walk away. And Utek's not the first and he's not the last, but certainly in our region, he left a big imprint. But there are others, and for all of the people who kind of come in and they want to cash in their penny stocks at huge bonanzas, it's been a long, slow growth. And really, COVID, as you say, was the only thing that took it to exponential levels. But back in the day, you had people come on the scene and then disappear with alarming rapidity. Mace, why don't you tee this up? Our next vanishing vanquisher, Bill Boylan.
Well, it's, I think that even to be a little more clear about it, I've given this, even you and I discussed this morning, and I've given this a little bit more thought today. And I thought about it a lot back in the day. And we were in the bad habit of raising people up. And then when we decided that they spent too much on paper, pencils, and paper clips for running their event, then we tarred and feathered them and we ran them out of town. And I think that I'm just kind of like, part of the thing that Paul and I talked about this morning is that people like UTech and the Boylans came in and I said this even about Steve Dodge most recently. I was like, yeah, when he's tired of putting his own money up for these events, then he's going to go away. And I don't know that that's necessarily happened 100% with Steve, but a lot of these other people, for whatever reason, like you shined a little light on why UTech went away. And I'm sure there was more to it than just, the room being empty for the band and all that. But what do you think? Why do you think that's happened? I mean, some people, they just come in and, like, obviously we've all been bitten by what I call the sweet 16 bug. Like you fall in love with this sport and it's like the first girl you ever kiss and you're like, no, this is the best thing ever. You don't understand. Like, this is me telling you that. You can trust me. It is awesome. It's amazing. And there's been so many people that have come and tried to really light the fire and then just walked away with their gas and their matches when they decided, for whatever reason, this isn't worthy of my efforts.
Well, I mean, part of it is they are trying to kickstart the sport about, in the case of UTech, whatever, 5 to 10 years ahead of where it was at the time. And the fact that it is, because that's not really the true position of where the sport is. It's not sustainable unless you continue to throw
Yeah.
that amount of,
Sure.
of what you can argue is artificial money, because it's not money that the sport has earned. I mean, I call these people with a great amount of respect, because they've all been wonderful and generous to the sport, but literally some of them are sugar daddies,
Sure,
but
sure.
why did they leave? I mean, the circumstances for each of them leaving are different. I mean, another great example would be Kozo Shimbo and the Japan Open, but the ball golf course, the Robert Trent Jones ball golf course, my understanding was it changed ownership, and the new ownership was less interested in having disc golf, even though we played in the bad weather season on their state-of-the-art ball golf course in a really, really nice part of Japan. And the fact that his larger business, Hero Disc, was one aspect of the Hero family of companies. The biggest one apparently was Hero Barbecue
Oh man, yeah.
equipment, and when that company was sold, that was Shimbo-san selling his investment in disc golf. So that's why those are some of the reasons why the Japan Open of the mid to late 90s and early 2000s all of a sudden came to an end. Now let me just show you something in the case of Boylan. Hang on.
Okay.
I played the Boylan, the Laurel Springs Open once, 1991, that same year. There was the big.
Oh yeah, there
Can
it
you
is.
guys see that?
Yep.
Yeah,
For
yeah,
those of
yeah,
the
for
viewers who
sure.
can't, I mean, this
Good
was
fingers.
this was circa 1989, 90, 91, 92. This was the coolest course anywhere in the world, on a Christmas tree farm. I mean, if you saw Kenny's interview with Brian Ahart at the USDGCs, if you've seen that, and you really should if you're interested in what the sport was like 25, 30 years ago during its more formative days. I mean, Kenny goes on about how he felt stepping up to the tees here and seeing where the basket was. You were playing more long holes than we'd ever seen before, with great elevation changes, and it was just the best course in the world at the time. Or if there were better ones, I just personally wasn't aware of them. But my understanding, and somebody can correct me, somebody from way back can correct me, but my understanding was the Christmas tree farm was sold. And
Right.
that's
He sold
why,
I believe
and
that's
that's why
correct.
the Laurel Springs Open came to an end.
Yeah,
I mean, some of the people that you're talking about, I remember there was a TD, I think, in either Oklahoma or Texas, who ran one of the biggest events there for many years. But I think the more typical scenario is you get one person who gets into it and raises the bar, and then he does it again the next year and the next year, and eventually, he starts to run out of gas, and he's looking for people to really step up and take some of the load off of their shoulders, and nobody does. And that's when they say, well, it's been fun, but I'm burnt out, so I'm done. Thanks for the memories.
Yeah.
I think that's the more typical scenario that we're talking about.
And obviously, the opposite of these people who have the burnout is someone like John Houck, who started Circular Skies over Texas, who's Circular Productions, National Doubles, world's biggest, and still extremely important on a daily basis to the growth of the sport. So
Yeah.
slow and steady always wins the race.
Yeah,
Now,
but it's
well-
also, in the case of Houck, he's making his living from the sport, whereas these other people were doing it purely out of the love and as volunteers.
But
Well, and
you
he's
say-
also been really wise about the way he's reinvented himself every so often
Yeah.
and decided, hey, you know what, I'm not going to do that anymore, and I'm going to do this instead. And I'm still following the disc golf path, but I'm not as in tune to one area as I am in another. And he's found a place to be really successful with it,
Yeah.
So let's just before we get on to your work, and we have one serious conversation we want to have with you regarding something regarding the PDGA. But before we get to
Sure.
that,
Yeah.
1992, great year for you. You had 11 events, 8 caches. This was the first year you turned masters, really starting to flex your wings. You get your first win at the island, your second win at the Mid America Open, which was paired with
A-tier.
Laurel Springs. One of the two of them formed an interior tour mini challenge. The winner,
Yep.
you know, whoever could place at each one. You took your third win was at Grand Rapids, winning
Yep.
by 7 over Stocky Bob.
Yep.
And when I first mentioned that you were a two-time world master champion, Mace Man's comment was, "Well, we knew who was doing the heavy lifting, as in Bob Harris, but as we can see back in '92,
I
you were
was a
doing
better
pretty good for
Bob
yourself."
Bob was a really good driver. I was a better putter than Bob. So yeah, I guess he threw it further, so he did the heavy lifting.
So, but the big finisher, it was the closer for the Can-Am Tour that year, and it's immortalized in the video with John Houck doing the narration. The Columbus Open. You took second there, beating Terry Teal.
I played good. I
You were
played
ahead of
good.
Greenwell.
Yep.
You were ahead of Snapper.
Yep.
Those are big names that you beat there.
Yeah, I was leading
second
after
place.
3 or 4 rounds, and Teal blew past me the last round. But he was he came in fourth in the 1990 World. So
Right.
he was also the first player who wore spandex from top to bottom. So
Was that
I think he
distracting?
was a gymnast or something by training, because he was one of these guys whose form you could say had been built by dancer size or something like that. So yeah.
Exercise. I love it. So do you remember, I know we've seen the video of the finals, but you were there, right? You saw the final 9?
Oh, if you're talking about the one of the most famous shots of all time,
Oh, we're leading up to that.
if you look at the video footage of it, I am one of the handful of people who's standing behind CJB when he throws the greatest rock shot ever thrown.
Nice.
Yeah.
You were up there in the command booth with them.
Yeah. That was never forget. I'll never forget that moment, because that was the greatest shot at the time. That was the greatest shot that had ever been thrown in disc golf. Yeah.
And
the rock shot off the dam.
Did you have the full glam look? Could you see
Oh
it
yeah.
go all the way?
Oh yeah. You could. I mean, this thing stayed over the conifers on the right forever. Just held its line. And because the dam is 150 feet above where the basket is, I mean, eventually it's going to run out of steam, and then it's going to fall left because it's got a long ways to fall. And it fell left and smoked the chains and almost knocked the basket over, because it would have been a temp basket, and stepped up and made the putt for 2. Yep.
And you remember
Very cool.
Remember the roar from the crowd?
I remember the roar. I mean, what people don't remember is on the previous hole, which was like 490 something downhill, which was a long hole in those days. Valencia put it like 8 feet past the basket, and go look at Valencia's arm speed on that shot in the video if you want to see some twitch muscle fiber. Okay. Yeah, Valencia was he and Climo were number 1, number 2. Climo was number 1, but if he was number 1, then Valencia was definitely number 2 for
when I was
a 3
doing
or
the
4
research
year
on
span.
I was doing the research on Valencia. One of the things I looked at was an interview with Climo. He was on Brody, I think it's Brody Smith and Paulo Olivares' show. And Brody was asking him, what about, nobody was good back in the day. And Climo says, no, Steve Valencia, he was very good. And when I was doing the reading of the research at the time, people were saying, we remembered back in the day that it was if Climo showed up, everybody was playing for second. But at the time, it was if Climo or Steve showed up.
Yeah.
And it really was a battle of the Titans.
Yeah. I mean, Climo's dream year. I mean, Climo was the world number 1 from when he won his first one in 1990. But his dream year was 1995, when he won something like 23 of 25 events he entered. That's, that matches anything that Macbeth has done. That Macbeth, when he won the Grand Slam, I think 6 or 7 years ago. But I mean, it's true that it's true that after a while, people other than Valencia and 8 times out of 10, Climo would finish first. But it was true that after a while, there was a mentality of we're all playing for second at the Worlds, you know, especially once Climo
Or
grabbed
anywhere
the
in
lead
Florida.
and then started to extend it. But then if you look at the names who came in second, I mean, a lot of them, that was their greatest finish in a Worlds. Mike Sayer was a good player, damn good player.
Really good player.
But if I recall correctly, he was one of the many who finished second to Climo at the World Championships.
You
The
mentioned
best
that.
performance by someone who finished second, aside from Sammy Joe Grazafi, was Mike Randolph in Texas when he basically birdied everything in sight in the final 9, including some incredibly hard holes. And he closed Climo's gap from like 11 to 5 or something in a final 9 and blew everybody else out of the way to claim second. So
That
typically
1995.
during that span, it was Climo, and as the worlds unfolded, he would, eventually he would find his way to the top, and then he would stretch his lead, and by the end of it, the nearest competitors were whatever, anywhere from 3 to a dozen back.
Yeah.
And it was game
It's
over.
it's pretty interesting how that time frame was like that for such a long time. And then, and then Barry came on the scene, and and there was a couple other people that were
Yeah.
able to,
Ron
Randolph,
Russell,
Ron Russell.
Cam Todd.
One of the things that Barry would do, or that Randolph would do, is he'd show up for like a month before the Worlds, and he'd be in the top 3, and then he'd finish in the top 3 of the Worlds again, and then we wouldn't see him again for another 10 months. And he'd show back, and so, like, one of the things that I really enjoy now is when, like when you look at USDGC, whether you're there in person or you're watching it at home on Sunday morning, you still have, you know 8 or 10, maybe as many as 12 guys now that still have a chance on Sunday. It may not last very long. That may change, 3 holes in, for the third card or whatever. But it's really nice to see that there's so many good players now, as opposed to just 1 or 2, and then 5 strokes back, then there's the pack, or 10 strokes back, there's the pack. It's really, really nice to see the development.
There's more, the sport is, well, the year I started as administrator, the previous year, which Becky took to December the 31st, Becky Powell, there was like 3,900 current members. And probably 97, probably about 2,000 of those were pros. So there's 2,000 pro PDGA members. Now PDGA has 130,000 current members, and it's about 20% pro. So it has 25 to 30,000 pro members, including all the Europeans, of course. But that means that the sport at the top is 12 or 13 times as big as it was during Climo's prime. In fact, even bigger than it was in the mid 90s, because I gave you figures for towards the late 90s. And that's, yeah. But the other part of it was, look at Climo in his prime physically. This guy was a freak. He's like 6'2", he's tall, he's lanky, and he's got a wingspan of God knows how long.
It's 2 inches longer than he is tall, or it was back then.
Wow.
Yeah. And and he was, of course, success breeds confidence, breeds more success. And, it goes the other way for your competitors.
For sure.
I've lost to this guy so many times now that it's in my head that I'm probably not going to beat him.
We got a quick question from Terry Calhoun, who's joined in with us. He asks, would you say that 99 to 2000 was a big split between eras of disc golf? If you want to divide disc golf into eras, is that kind of one of the natural dividing lines?
Well, it could be. The most obvious way that comes to mind why that would be the case is in the year 2000, as Terry knows, because he was a key part of the cog of Team Michigan. we ran the first joint Pro-Am Worlds in Greater Detroit, Hudson Mills, Kensington, River Bends, if I remember right. I may not perfectly, but that was 825 players. 825 players. I remember this because I was the administrator, and as you said, I'm fairly stats oriented. 825 players, and what was the, for a stats person, there was something that happened at that tournament that was super, super cool. Every player in the tournament, except for the youngest junior girls and boys, played the exact same 8 preliminary rounds. So you could not only tell where you were in open division, you could tell where you were out of the 810 players aside from the youngest boys and girls. So I knew where I actually finished in Masters, where that would have put me in open, and I would have come in, I think, third out of 280 in MA1 is the way it worked out. But that, statistically, that was awesome. But the other thing about, that tournament, that was incredibly organized and inspired club. They had something called the Michigan Merch Machine, where they ordered up all this merch and they turned it all over 3 times, if I remember the story correctly, before the tournament even started. And what it meant was the payout was like twice as big as anything we had ever seen before. And there were a couple of times after that where we took a step back. 2002 was a challenging year because we didn't have a World's bid until late in the day. We thought that Minnesota would do it again in 2002 after 2001, and eventually they said no. And then board member Dave Nesbitt stepped up and we ran it in Houston in August. So it was a heat fest.
Horrible. Horrible.
Not the greatest Worlds, but power to the people who stepped up and helped put it on in our hour of need. But by 2004, when we ran another Pro-Am Worlds, and it was also, I would say it was equally good. They were different events, but it was equally good to 2000 in that we were in Des Moines. We were playing in these unbelievably beautiful rolling hill courses with huge mature trees. And it was early August and the gods of weather were with us. It was like 78 to 80
epic.
Every day. The sun shone down and it was like we were blessed. So
that was definitely probably the best Worlds I've ever been to.
Within the context of what happened in Pro-Am Worlds or PA 2000, I mean, that's the obvious thing that answers what Terry put forth there when it comes to my mind. I mean, the World Championships that year took a giant leap forward. Now the other things that happened were, at that time, Chuck Kennedy, Roger Smith had just done all the tweaking and experimentation for what would become the rating system. In fact, the rating system was already a year or two into existence then. And so that was a big development and benefit to the members, and a super cool way of comparing how good you're doing and if you're getting better or worse, or where you rank in your state, or how you rank against the best players in this country, or whatever. And the other thing that happened was we had a fantastic board of directors, of whom Terry was one. Teo Poise, Dave Nesbitt, John Lixet, Terry, and Terry can come up with a couple others off the top of our head, but that board really did things. And one of the other things that they did was, this was really the advent of IT, and we took our old DOS-based database, and Teo and Steve Gantz and another gentleman from Ohio, whose name is escaping me at the moment, were the key players behind putting developing what was called PDB, which was the first truly Microsoft software-based database. And a few years later, it evolved to the genesis of what it is now. But that was a giant leap forward. It also was a lifesaver for the office staff because it automated more of the processes. Everything, as Mr. B can attest, because Mr. B, incidentally, for those who don't know, Maceman, I think, knows, Mr. B was my administrative assistant my first 1 to 2 years on the job, so 97 to 98. And he has firsthand knowledge of what it took, for example, to type in a tournament back then. You would have to select it from its entry in the database. You would type it in when it was scheduled. And then you would go, okay, what's the division code for this guy? MPO, place first. And then if you knew his PDJ number, or you could read it off of the pages, because it was all handwritten TD reports, you would go 4297. And then the database would go, that's Ken Climo. And then you would go, okay, how many points did he get? And you had manually figured out how many points he had gotten for first. And you would type in the points, and then you would type in the money, and then you would go enter, and then you would go second place MPO. Yada, 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 all the way through.
It was kind of like, in a way, kind of like exam grading. I would take the reports and I would take a red pen and do how many points. I would go each person, and then I'd sit there and just type it all in. As you say, it was a slow, laborious process, but kind of turned me into a bit of a Rain Man when it came to PDGA numbers there for a while. I would remember in 98, I was going out to the big tournaments at the beginning to try to get PDGA renewal memberships. At the big early events, like I believe it was Raleigh, Bowling Green. I think I went down to Florida that year, and I would meet people, and they'd say, I'm so and so, and I just spit out their number, and they'd be like, "What? How do you know this? Are you stalking me?" Wow.
I've never met you before.
So let's get into one of the questions that when Mason and I were talking about having you on as a guest, this is the question that we want to settle definitively. And we can see from the jersey that you're wearing, from the jacket you're wearing, we can see the embroidered crest. That is the logo that was designed in 1996 and lasted until
last year.
This is last year. Long time logo, so that's the one that most people are familiar with. They call it the Throwing Man. The background, as far as I'm aware, is that Craig Dodds from Massive Graphics in Norman, Oklahoma. He was asked by Becky to put together some graphic ideas. He put 3 together, presented them. She liked that kind of look, but it didn't quite look like that. It was more like the professional major league sports colors, red and blue.
Yeah, I remember
Christy Vandenbosch who did a little tweak on that to give it that color. But the big controversy comes from who is the model. Now, I know that Mark Vasicek says that, or sorry, Craig Dodd says that it was Mark Vasicek because Mark was Craig's roommate and they worked together at Massive Graphics.
Well, I have never heard, I actually played once with that dude at the Kansas City Wide Open, but I've never heard that. But then again, I mean, 96 was just before my time. And there was another image similar to this that preceded it by 3 or 4 years in which the putting person, you can't see their back leg. And that person, we all believe, was Steve Weisskopf, because that's what his putt looked like. And he was one of the best. And in fact, his fellow great competitors used to refer to it as the wise putt.
Okay.
Yeah. But the best, I mean, I do not know, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I don't have the definitive answer to it. But it's going to be either what Craig said, because he was one of the 2 key people at the center of it. I used to think maybe it's Jeff Moulton, but the name who I heard most often, and it makes sense from a Christy Vandenbosch point of view, because she was a Michigander, was Ken Gill.
Yeah, that's
one of Michigan's top players from a generation ago.
In the research, it comes out that apparently Ken signed some kind of release waiver to the PDGA that may be in the palette of documents we need to unearth. But let me present to you Mason my case. I'm going to share my screen here.
You guys are loonies.
Yes, we are. So you tell me. I mean, I've analyzed this. The only difference is the angle of the elbow of his throwing hand.
And who am I looking at?
This is
Riv.
Rivers Sherrod at Circle
Rivers
R
Sherrod.
Ranch,
Yes, I thought it looked like Rivers
1995.
because it didn't look like Vasicek from what little, and it certainly isn't Ken Gill or Maltback.
Now I can see in the PDGA logo here, there's the inference that there is some large satellite dish action going on here. So it could be Malton based on the ear size alone. But if you look at the biometrics, I mean, I look at that and I'm thinking that's almost perfectly riv down to even like how the t-shirt's hanging.
It's
So-
pretty close.
So I
Well,
guess-
but I mean, if you had a picture of Ken Gill in the exact same pose and one of Vasicek in the exact same pose,
Right.
what does it look like? I mean, it does bear an uncanny resemblance to the Sherrod photo. But I mean, in those days, I mean, this putting form, which is, it's the straightforward putt as opposed to the straddle putt. I mean, that's the way 90% of us putted, and so of course, among the 500 best players, at a certain point in their delivery, some of them are going to look eerily similar.
Yeah, I could see that. I can definitely see that. It's just interesting that there's a couple of people that firmly believe it's them.
Yeah.
And then there's several people that don't think that's the case at all. And I don't know. I really enjoy the debate, you know what I mean? And just not necessarily being one of the debaters, but hearing everybody's no, that's not the case. This is it. This is how it is, and so I was hoping that maybe you could shine the spotlight on it.
I do not have the definitive answer because I was not involved intimately at that level. And I think the only thing that happened after I arrived on the scene, which was January 1, 97, was I think we had the first ever board summit, or the first one in several years shortly thereafter. And I think Christie introduced the logo to the board at that meeting. So this logo was finalized in, dates from 96, like you said, but was finalized in early 97. The alarming thing staring at this now is that there's no way this putt is going in.
I know, right?
Yeah,
For 27 years, we got a doinker right there.
Why?
I didn't remember that until seeing it now myself, to be honest with you, because it certainly, I thought it was going in for sure, but it's definitely not going in.
Oh, you know what though, guys? I mean, you guys have somebody has manipulated that shot you've got, because I have a sticker of the same image on my wall up here, and the putt is in line with the top of the basket, halfway from the arm to the target.
Okay.
So someone has manipulated the placement of the disc, and that particular rendition that you just showed the universe.
I lifted that off somewhere.
Yeah,
somewhere
Mr. B,
archived
you're
on the
guilty.
internet.
I know you're.
Plagiaristic
I can't manipulate
activity.
That well.
Yeah.
So listen, we've had you on. We're at the 90-minute mark, and we don't want to indulge you too much longer.
No, I'm
we've got
enjoying this.
Couple of things just to wrap it up. Africa, the importance of Africa. You said you've lived there. Did you say 4 years in Lesotho?
4 years in Lesotho, 9 months in Ethiopia. Visited there a whole bunch of times.
And did you run the first ever tournament in Africa?
No, I was there. I did have the first hole-in-one on a basket in Africa.
Nice.
The first two, that was in 1989 and 1990. So good luck challenging me for that one. No, the first tournament ever in Africa was the Ethiopian Open in, I can see my logo because I have the disc here, 2016. It was in Asosa, Ethiopia, which is in far western Ethiopia. It's a provincial capital with a small university. There is a disc golf fanatic there by the name of Johannes Dessalin, who was exposed to the sport by a Finnish disc golfer who was posted to Ethiopia for a period of time. He became a fanatic himself and applied for a PDGA Marco Polo grant, which provided enough funds to get 18 baskets welded together in a Sosa. And there is a gentleman in Wisconsin called John Luetzo who runs iFling Plastic, who has a big heart for disc golf in new countries. And he and Johannes somehow got hold of each other, and he came over and basically taught Johannes how to run a tournament and helped him manage it. And I was there in the background. We had Tapani Aulu from Finland and Derek Robbins, who has played PDJ tournament disc golf in more countries than anyone else ever have. That's his particular goal. Every time there's a new country, he goes and plays the tournament there. They were there, as were a couple more Americans. So 4 or 5 people made the trip all the way to remote western Ethiopia. I mean, this place is 500 miles from the capital city. And you fly a little turboprop, probably a Bombardier turboprop to get there. And that was the first tournament in Africa. Anyways.
So, but I remember pictures from, I think, on your wall somewhere there of a pole hole. Did you bring a pole hole with you to Lesotho?
This photo is from the handover of the basket, if you can see it.
Yeah.
Let's see if you can see it.
That's the one.
That is May 1990, when my wife and I are getting to leave. This is the one of the local kids. He was the son of we were based on hospital grounds in the mountains of Lesotho. So don't envision a big modern hospital. This was a large cinder block construction, be behind us about half a mile. This is the son of the hospital ambulance driver, Lucky Latuma, and he was the one who played with me the most. And so when it was time to go, he got the basket. The basket was welded in the town in the mountains where I was based. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's
So
where that basket.
you may not have organized the first tournament, but you brought the first pole hole to Africa.
Yes, that would be a fair statement.
That's incredible.
That's awesome.
That picture, by the way, made the cover of the Disc Golf World News that year.
That's correct. Yeah.
So let's move on now. We're going to just wrap up here with talking about other sports. We know you're a huge sports fanatic, and in talking about scheduling today, you were expressing some potential conflict that might happen with the Shohei Ohtani news that's already come out there. You are a firm sports fan, so may start us off here.
So in your opinion, what are your favorite? Well, first of all, what other disc sports do you play?
I do not play any other disc sports. In fact, I hardly ever play disc golf because I became a long distance cyclist, and I've done it all that there is to do as a player in disc golf. I played the world's 12 or 13 years in a row, Japan a couple of times, European Open. So, and then when I, got heavily into the cycling, I mean, I wasn't playing disc golf. So what happened is I was getting older because, we're now my last serious tournament was the 07 Worlds, which was my rookie grandmaster year. So, and that's 16 years ago.
Right.
I mean, I've played 20 times in the last 16 years. So, and it's because of bicycling. It's also because I've got various body injuries. I hyperextended this shoulder in disc golf once, which has never completely gone away. It means that doesn't have the endurance that it used to. Scope on the right knee from twisting on the tee pads, and and beyond between that and playing so infrequently, when I play, my game just laughs at me. It says, the head is still there. Okay, this is what I want to do with this turn, and I can still get the turn, but I mean, I can throw 260 feet, and I can hit like 1 out of 5 putts from 20 to 30, so it's just not good enough. But that's because I've done other things. Now, to answer your question about favorite other sports, Mace, I mean, it used to be hockey, but I'm sick of hockey. Hockey needs a bigger ice surface to take advantage of the level and speed that the players are at today. Like the way the ice surface, the size of the ice surface during the famous Canada-Russia series in 1972.
So international size.
Yeah, I mean, right now it's dump it in, chase it, ring it around the boards about 18 times, see if a pass in front connects. And if it does, you got a chance to score. But hockey is too repetitive to have gotten my interest. Plus, I was a Leaf fan. I was at the parade as a 10-year-old in 1967.
Yeah, I've heard
I
all
hung
of
in
this from
there
B.
for 50 years. And I think a couple of years ago during the COVID year, when we had the all Canadian division and the Leafs were easily the best team. And then they met Montreal, who were not good, and Montreal booted them out of the first round of the playoffs. I went, guys, I am done.
That was it, eh?
Yeah,
Okay.
that was it. That was it. But the answer is there are three sports that are my favorites more than other sports. One of them is track and field. That goes to,
Interesting.
that goes to international sport. I mean, there's nothing I love more in terms of watching sports than watching the Ethiopians win the long distance road races or the 10,000 meters, and the women wins the 5,000, or the Kenyan wins the 5,000. I mean, that turns me on. This the Olympics or the World Track and Field Championships, where you literally got athletes from just about every country in the world, and some of the places which are very poor and off the beaten track. The guy who finishes second in the triple jump nowadays is a guy from Burkina Faso, believe it or not. And to me, that is just super cool. The
Yeah, I'm a big
second sport is football, or soccer as it is known, because that was my game as a kid. I am a big fan of world football, and World Cup is one of the greatest sporting events as far as I'm concerned out there. And the last one is baseball, as I alluded to Shohei Ohtani. Baseball is, to me, the ultimate game of strategy. If you really know everything that's going on every pitch. I played a lot of fastball after I stopped playing soccer. I was a pretty good fastball player. It's a stats game. The Blue Jays won the World Series twice, which was super cool. Bit of a while ago now, but none of us will ever forget when it happened.
Yeah.
And the Toronto Blue Jays, for their ups and downs, are a pretty entertaining team as well. So I like those are my favorite sports. But the sport I watch the most is probably still disc golf, because I'm plugged into my disc golf network. Certainly just about every day for all the majors, and certainly for the last day, usually both the women and the men at the DGPT events. Yeah.
So soccer, I remember when I first started going down the island a lot in the early mid 90s. And if it was Sunday, we knew you wouldn't be on the course because it's soccer Sunday.
Yep.
And you would just be, and we're all like, what? Soccer? What the hell is that?
Yeah,
But
I
you
was a soccer
were
goalie.
following it from back in the day. Do you have a specific team that's been your team?
In soccer?
Yeah.
Cameroon.
Cameroon.
Yeah.
Nice. Do you enjoy certain leagues? Like, do you watch the English Premier League, or do you follow Serie A?
The English Premier League is the number one league. The Bundesliga in Germany is basically number two, and then it's Serie A and Calcio in Italy, Spain and Italy. Those are the top leagues. Yeah, I mean, there's so many games, and most of them are Saturdays. And Saturday I'm going to the gym, and then I'm going to the market and supermarket to do all the shopping. And then if it's disc golf season, I'm probably going home and watching DGN. So, but I mean, if it's World Cup or it's a European Champions League, then I'm more likely to be watching. If Team Canada is playing, I'm definitely watching. Yeah.
Did you any comments on Sinclair's recent retirement from the game as the all-time best global soccer player?
Well, the all-time best women's player, amongst others. I mean, there's a woman called Marta from Brazil who's acknowledged to be one of the best. Yeah, I mean, it's great. I mean, I look at women's sport like a women's soccer like I look at women's sport, and it really is great to see those sports who are really putting the women front and center after so many years, like the women's NBA, like pro tennis does it, like soccer is doing it, and like disc golf is doing it, because for everything you see there, the bottom line is that, unfortunately, try as we might, we have not moved the bar in terms of the percentage of PDJ members. We have not moved it beyond what it was for the last 25 years of 6.5% to 7%. I think we've made it to 8% with all the extra efforts of the last few years. But and to see the sport that we're all involved in treating women as equitably as they can, and giving them, much more return pound for pound than dollar to dollar originates with them. But we're not going to get into the impact of money on the sport here. But I mean, that's the key there, and that's the key for me with Christine Sinclair. I remember when I first saw a Women's World Cup, it was China against somebody. I went, wow, these guys are really good, because the Chinese were just going bap, 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 bap with their passes, and occasionally you'd see just a rocket of a goal, and you went, yeah, this is really cool. But I don't, with all, call me gender insensitive, but I typically watch the men's game.
Well, I tell you, we were just down at the USDGC back in October, and where Mace's tent was in the vendor village was right across from the main stage, and they had this huge screen providing, and the level of detail, the 4K quality, the beauty of the coverage, incredible where they brought this from, the old scratchy video days.
Yeah.
But we would follow very closely the women's match, because the Throw Pink Women's Champions, the championships was happening at the same time, but they went out in the early tee times.
Yeah.
So as we're setting up, as we're just in the early parts of the day, we'll follow, and it was some amazing, tightly contested, wonderful disc golf. And then at the end, the winners of all the distance showcase, it's the big finish, the big explosive firework finish for the end of the USDGC. You had, what was it, Mace? 3 women up there throwing, right?
Yeah, I think it was 3 and 3.
3 and
Or
3.
3 and 2.
I know Holland Hanley. Yeah, there was 3 women, but the
Yeah,
crowd
3 and
was
3.
equally
Well, I hope
pumped
they
for the
had that
women
young
with the
girl
big
from
trucks.
rural Georgia
Oh yeah,
who threw
she
the
was there.
greatest shot by a woman ever on
Ellie
hole
Ezra.
18.
Oh,
Yeah.
she's
The junior world champion. Oh
I
my
thought she was
God.
from New Jersey or Pennsylvania.
Well, I think that she's resided in both places.
Okay.
But yeah,
No,
the redheaded.
her page says, I looked it up. She's from a small town in Georgia, but
Okay.
maybe that's where her family's based. Who knows? Maybe she
Ellie-
went somewhere
Ellie-
else for school.
Ellie Ezra. Yeah, she popped like 550 in qualifying, and you could tell that was her first throw, like her first big throw. But just her reaction, it was one of the highlights of the week for me, just because like I called it, and I was looking right at her, and just the whole way she reacted, I could tell that was a high mark for her at the time, and and then she's got what, 2 brothers or 3 brothers and 2 sisters in tow as well. There's 6 of them total, and they were all just as excited as anybody else. It was an amazing thing to watch and to see. It's definitely one of the highlights of the week for me, was just seeing her reaction, but then also seeing the way that her siblings rallied around her, and her mom and her grandma and her grandpa were there too. And yeah, it was something else. And I think that one of the things that I've noticed, like you mentioned the WNBA, and I've also seen it with women's college basketball and women's soccer. Those games aren't the same as when we were growing up. I mean, like, this was even as late as the middle '80s when I graduated high school. You didn't go to the girls' basketball games on Friday night unless you were dating somebody on the team, or if your sister was on the team. And then a lot of times you still wouldn't show up for that game. But it's not the same game. It's not. And I think that the women's game in disc golf is coming along. It's not the same game as it was in the '90s and the early 2000s. I mean, they're definitely, the ladies' skill levels have definitely elevated multiple times in the last 5 years, I think, and that's. But at the same time, I still think that everybody's throwing the kitchen sink and everything else possible at ladies, and a lot of them don't care to show up. I mean, obviously we've got the 49 or the 45 to 60 of them that are showing up on the pro tour, but it still doesn't seem like, I mean, like you said, the percentages come up 1%.
8%. 8%. But
I
we need
mean,
it. It's one of the things. It's
obviously we're
one
not
of the
doing
things
something
we
right, or
have to.
they're just not interested.
Yeah, it's one of the things we have to overcome in the sport, because one of the things, I mean, it is a pipe dream to be in the Olympics, but one of the key criteria is gender
There she is
participation in
again.
the sport.
Grab her, Brian. Grab her.
What are you want? Come say hello.
Get over here.
Hi, Lori.
Oh
Hi,
my
Lori.
God.
I know you
PDGA
can't see me,
memberships
but
manager, 1997 to 2007.
miss
She
you,
did-
Lori.
Good
She
to
deserves
see
a gold
you.
watch. That's
So let me
awesome.
just say one other quick thing, because we were talking about hole 18 at USD. What was also super cool? Seeing the footage of 12-year-old Gannon Burr stepping up to that tee, and then comparing it to seeing him today.
It's something in it.
When he was such a young fanatic about the game, just really starting to learn. But you can see it's 12-year-old Gannon. You can see the form already. I mean, that was another very, very cool moment. In terms of the women in disc golf, I just want to say shout out to Kristen, shout out to Evelina, shout out to Henna, shout out to all these other top European women. There's another young lady in Finland whose name is escaping me, which is unforgivable, because I played in the same group as her on her home course in Finland earlier this summer. But as the international director, there's nothing that turns me on more than seeing international players winning the big tournaments. And hopefully it won't be long. Well, Jesper won the European Open, so he's won a major. I think, as you guys know, Marcus finished twice second in the Worlds. Jesper was third at the big show in 2000. Niklas has finished second twice in recent majors. The players this year and the
without a doubt.
a year ago. I mean, it would be super great to see male European players win the elite and the major events. But even more important, and this is something that is beyond its due date, that I have been fighting for years. Haven't won the battle, but I believe we're going to win it soon. And that is the first MPO FPO Worlds in Europe.
Where do you think would be the likeliest place?
Finland.
Finland.
Finland followed by Sweden. Yeah.
Now, Finland is just, from what I hear, it's going bananas with disc golf and for disc golf. We had Scott Stokely on in the summer, and he was saying that an insane percentage of students, like student age kids, play disc golf every day after school.
Yeah.
And
no, one of the surveys they did, they've done a few of them, but the last one I heard about was they surveyed the school kids, and amongst school-aged boys, disc golf rated number 3 in terms of their favorite sport overall. So it's something like ice hockey, and then God knows what, Finnish baseball, there is such a thing, or cross-country skiing, or whatever.
I bet it's not a 162 game season.
Yeah, soccer probably.
They're pretty good at cross-country skiing and sniping, so I think that might be the second popular.
Biathlon.
Well, before we go, I know I wanted to do this before we started, but I just want to acknowledge one of our guests we had in August. Her father passed away recently, John Duffy Cardiff, Kansas City area, and we just want to send our condolences and our thoughts and intentions out to the family and to Tavish. We had Tavish; she was a special guest, a good friend of the show, and so our hearts are with you. Brian, we can't thank you enough for taking the time and taking the energy and digging deep into your personal memorial archives, for coming up with old school information and telling us some great stories. Thank you.
My
Yeah,
pleasure. But
without a doubt.
let's do it again sometimes because we haven't discussed the whole international program or PDJ Canada. So that would be a good topic, unless your theme is the good old days.
Well, we do. I
Mm,
mean, we want to focus on that, but that's not our only sole focus. And we always want to have people wanting more. So we want to leave you with the sense that, hey, I want to come back.
Yeah, well, it would be my pleasure to come back. I mean, I really enjoy doing these things, especially with characters who are near and dear to me, as you know you are, Mr. B. And, the partnership, Mace, that you had with Mr. B for so many years was beyond entertaining and, did a whole lot of good for the sport as well. So
Thank you.
Well,
big,
it's
big hug to both of you. It was my pleasure today. Cheers.
Right on.
yeah.
Thanks,
Well,
Brian.
thanks a lot. I appreciate those kind words, and it really. I had so many good times up in Toronto, and it hasn't been because I didn't want to come back. That hasn't been the reason I haven't been back. I'm targeting next summer, but I also, just want to say that again, this whole idea came together just because I came to realize that me and Paul weren't interacting enough, in my opinion, and I just was like, man, if nothing else comes from this, we're going to be interacting on a really regular basis. And except for the last 6 weeks, man, we've been talking on the phone or Zooming more than 2 or 3 times a week, if not more than that. And it's just a great way that we've been able to revitalize our friendship.
And then we get to hang time with old friends like yourself as well, Brian. So
Very cool.
Yeah, without a
Very
doubt.
cool. No, it's been an absolute pleasure, guys. I really enjoyed it. And, with a little warning, I'll be happy to do it anytime again.
all
All
right.
right.
Well, best of luck down the road. Keep the rubber on the road and watch out for that turn.
Thank you. On my bike.
Well, right on, brother. We'll see you soon.
Cheers.
I'm like
job.
this.
Good job, buddy. So let's you want to I got to start working on dinner. We'll
All
have
right.
we'll have to
Let's
chop it up
talk.
later.
Let's talk in the next day or two.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, come on.